I'm going to stop sharing so I can see people's faces. There we go. I like to see people's faces as they come in. Welcome, welcome. I'm going to give a few minutes for people to kind of connect to the audio, get situated. I'm just going to go through and scroll. I love looking at people's backgrounds. I feel like I'm one of those nosy people that's like, ooh, what pictures are on the wall back there? But if you have your camera off, that is okay too. We want you to feel really comfortable here. All right, I'm going to share my screen. So I just want to go ahead and get started, I suppose, now, and welcome everybody to Centering SEL in the Classroom Climate, meeting the needs of all students for effective and inclusive instruction. We're going to go ahead and put some things in the chat here. Rena Marie's going to help me out with that. And if you would like to have access to the files, there's a link in there for the tinyurl.com. With those files, you can see all of the resources that we're going to have for today. You can see note-taking forms that you can take back to your groups, you know, kind of just ways to organize your thoughts and organize the information here. There will also be a link in there for the sign-in sheet. We will put that in a few times in case you don't get it just now. And if you could please just sign in so that we have your information for hours in order to get you your credits. And then there also will be a survey you're welcome to do it at the end, of course, so that you can give us some feedback and let us know, you know, what you liked, what maybe you didn't like, or what you want to learn more about. And I'm happy to follow up with anybody about that. I have a lot of screens open, but still sometimes miss things in the chat. So I'm going to ask Rena Marie to kind of monitor that if that's possible. Thank you so much. And I will do my best to look in there, but it's a lot going on over here. So we'll go ahead and jump in here to our objectives. Today, we're going to try to understand a little bit better 2 of the 5 core competencies according to CASEL, which include self-awareness and self-management, how to create a classroom experience to foster and develop these skills for students. And when I talk about this, I want to make sure that everybody understands we're not just going to give you a bunch of things to do in the classroom. We really want to build that framework and that infrastructure for developing a really impressive SEL program yourselves and making sure that you're implementing these things according to the community that's around you in the classroom, in the families, and in the, you know, the general community. So I want to make sure to preface with that. And we're going to talk a little bit about flexibility for teachers and students. And what this really means is just as we're coming back into in-person education, you know, what are you bringing with you and what kind of a lens are you using to observe the students and the situations in your classroom? So here is our agenda. Again, we'll do some introductions. We'll do an overview of some of these frameworks as well as some OSPI standards that we can use in the classroom. We will take a short break just before we start to talk a little bit more about SEL and trauma. And that break is really nice before we get into that little deeper information and deeper, you know, activity if we have time. So let's go ahead and share in the chat for me your name and title or role, where you're joining us from, and what you're hoping to take away from today. While you're doing that, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background about myself. My name is Cassie Borges. I'm an inclusion specialist and lead for the Preschool Demonstration Site Project. I'm joining you from Tacoma, Washington today. I attended the University of Washington, where I received my master's degree in education, teaching certification for Washington State with a special education endorsement, and fulfilled my practicum to become a board certified behavior analyst. Before working here at the Herring Center, I was an early childhood educator at the Experimental Education Unit. I have been a board certified behavior analyst at the UW Autism Center, as well as a behavior technician prior to that. I've worked for STEPS. It's been quite a journey. I've had the opportunity to work with the Down syndrome community of Puget Sound Learning Program, which was really great. And through all of these experiences, it's been wonderful to get a better understanding of, you know, parents' perspectives, a neurodiversity perspective and the neurodiversity movement, an understanding of equity and inclusion and for all. And it's been really fantastic. I've also had the opportunity to present at the Washington Association for the Education of Young Children, or WIAC, the Infant and Early Childhood Conference, or IECC, and in the fall, we're going to be presenting for the Division for Early Childhood Conference, or DEC, which is unfortunately remote, but it'll be fun still. So I'm just going to scroll through and see who is here today. It looks like we have people from all over, so this is so wonderful. Welcome again. I'm so happy to have you all here. Feel free to put some questions in the chat if you'd like. Because this isn't a huge setting, if you also just want to shout out some questions, I'm totally okay with that. We do have a lot of material though, so I just want to keep that in mind as we're going through. And then we will have a spot at the very end to answer questions as well. So we're going to go ahead and do this survey because I want to get an idea of where everybody is in their knowledge or their strategies for SEL. So if you can jump to another browser and type in pollev.com/demo sites, or you're welcome to use your phone and text demo sites to 22333. And then once you join, you can give us your responses with an A, B, C, D, or E. So A is that you feel very confident in your understanding or knowledge of SEL and your strategies, somewhat confident, not confident, unsure, or none of the above. And that is okay. So I will give a few minutes for everybody to kind of start inputting their information in here. And this information will guide where we're going with this presentation too, and kind of how deep I get into some of these strategies. So I really do appreciate your feedback. Looks like we have a lot of somewhats. That's great. Unsure, that's totally fine to be unsure. Even though it's 10 o'clock here, I feel like it's still early and I'm still unsure about a lot of things today. I love how people are responding in the chat too. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. This is wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, we are going to go ahead and move on, but I really appreciate that feedback. And feel free to continue to jump in there if you'd like to, so we can use this information after as well. All right, so we're going to start off by talking about what is SEL, or social emotional learning. Well, social emotional learning is an integral part of our education and human development. SEL is the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. SEL advances education equity and excellence through authentic school, family, and community partnerships, which is really important to understand that it is that big, broad spectrum. And this helps to establish learning environments and experiences that feature trusting and collaborative relationships, rigorous and meaningful curriculum and instruction, and ongoing evaluation. SEL can help address various forms of inequity and empower young children or young people and adults to co-create thriving schools and contribute to safe, healthy, and just communities. I have a video here that we're going to watch from the CASEL framework that talks a little bit more about social emotional learning.
Social emotional learning is essential.
It's the tools that kids need to be resilient, to be problem solvers, to be good people.
SEL is really about the holistic development of young people.
SEL is trying to bring a balance to the individual and what are the personal competencies you need to develop to be successful. How do you pull them all together so that kids can relate and navigate the world more effectively?
The myth was that knowledge was information that could be bolted onto a brain like any other kind of mechanical part. The truth is knowledge is constructive. The truth is all learning is relational. The truth is that emotion drives attention and attention drives learning.
Social and emotional learning is about how you do school. It's about what the student experiences, what the student learns, how teachers teach.
We can think about schools and classrooms, out-of-school time spaces, families, etc., as places where there's an exchange of knowledge about the world, knowledge about yourself, and knowledge about the other persons that you're interacting with. All of those kinds of experiences, I think, help form and expose and shape the ways in which young people understand themselves and other people.
And we start talking about the whole child. Does your child understand self-awareness? Do they understand social awareness? Do they make good decisions? Are they responsible? And then we start talking about what that applies to academics and looking at all the essential skills we need them to be successful in life.
Children learn when their heart is open, engaged, connected, and filled with purpose.
Learning is magical, and through SEL, we can create conditions that allow all kids to access that magic.
All right, and we will talk a little bit more about CASEL as we continue on here. Does anybody have questions about that before I move on? Looks like we're good. All right. So let's move on to talk a little bit more about why we want to promote these social emotional learning strategies and structures in schools. SEL leads to some really great outcomes and improved behaviors. According to a 2011 meta-analysis of 213 students involving 270,000 students, SEL interventions that address CASEL's 5 core competencies increased students' academic performance by 11 percent points compared to students who didn't participate in the SEL programs. Students participating in the SEL programs also showed improved classroom behavior and increased ability to manage stress, depression, and better attitudes about themselves, others, and the school. SEL has really great long-term and global impact as well. SEL programming can have a positive impact of up to 18 years later on academics, conduct problems, emotional distress, and drug use, according to a 2017 meta-analysis of 82 research studies involving 100,000 students worldwide. That's what they found. SEL can provide an 11-to-1 return on investment. The average return on investment for 6 evidence-based programs was 11-to-1, meaning that for every dollar invested, there's an $11 return. That's according to a 2015 review by Columbia University. SEL can help reduce poverty and improve economic mobility. So SEL competencies are critically important for long-term success of all students in today's economy. A bipartisan 2015 report from the American Enterprise Institute and Brookings Institute recommends that several steps to scale up high-quality evidence-based SEL programs as a core component of children's education. And SEL also improves lifetime outcomes. There are statistically significant associations between SEL skills in kindergarten and key outcomes for young adults years later. SEL decreased the likelihood of living in or being on a waiting list for public housing, receiving public assistance, having any involvement with police before adulthood, and ever spending time in a detention facility, according to a 2015 national study published by the American Journal of Public Health. So really the question becomes, not why is it important, but why are we not doing this, high quality interventions in all of our programs throughout. So let's talk a little bit more about the CASEL structure. CASEL is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, or CASEL, and it's a great research for knowledge about high-quality evidence-based social and emotional learning. CASEL's mission is to help make evidence-based social and emotional learning an integral part of education from preschool through high school, which is really great to understand that we want to make sure that this is a lifespan concept. CASEL addresses 5 broad and interrelated areas of competencies and highlights illustrative examples for each, such as self-awareness and self-management, which we'll talk about today, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making, which we'll go over a little bit more tomorrow. CASEL 5, which is what these 5 concepts are, can be taught and applied in various developmental stages from childhood to adulthood and across diverse cultural contexts. Many schools, districts, and states and countries have used the CASEL 5 to establish preschools to high school learning standards, competencies, and articulate what the students should know and be able to know for academic success, school and civic engagement, and health and wellness, building careers.
And then you take the first one
So the key setting, Castle's framework, takes a systematic approach that emphasizes the importance of establishing equitable learning environments and coordinating practices across classrooms, schools, families, communities to enhance all students' social, emotional, and academic learning. Quality implementation of a well-designed, evidence-based classroom program and practices is a foundational element of effective SEL. So we believe it's really beneficial to integrate SEL throughout the school's academic curricula and culture across a broader context of school-wide practices and policies, and through ongoing collaboration with families and community organizations. So I'll say this a few times throughout this presentation, but SEL strategies are not a one-size-fits-all. These really do require you to think a little bit harder about the community in the classroom, in the school, around the families and caregivers that are involved in the school, as well as the community as a whole. And being able to coordinate these different areas is really great to foster youth voice, agency and engagement, establish supportive classroom and school climates, and models of discipline. They enhance SEL competencies and are grounded in really authentic family and community partnerships. So we'll go ahead and talk a little bit more about self-awareness. So this includes the capacity to recognize one's own strengths, as well as ground a sense of confidence and purpose. Things that can be included in this are integrating personal and social identities, identifying personal, cultural, and linguistic assets, identifying one's emotions, demonstrating honesty and integrity, linking feelings, values, and thoughts, examining prejudice and bias, experiencing self-efficacy, having a growth mindset, and developing interest in a sense of purpose. Self-awareness involves being able to take a bird's eye view of oneself and notice behaviors in which one does and does not engage, what one is good at, what could be improved upon. People who are self-aware are, according to one of our resources that we'll use for Flexible and Focus, a book that you'll receive a little bit later. So people who are self-aware are presumably more successful in their relationships and careers because they're able to see their own faults and ways in which they can improve, and they can choose to make personal goals to work on things that maybe they're not so good at and kind of improve upon those skills. Now getting into self-management, according to Castle, this includes the capacities to delay gratification, manage stress, and feel motivation and agency to accomplish personal and collective goals. So some of these things can include managing one's emotions, identifying and using stress management strategies, exhibiting self-discipline and self-motivation, setting personal and collective goals, using planning and organizational skills, showing the courage to take initiative, and demonstrating personal and collective agency. Self-management is a really pivotal skill for future success in life and involves being able to set goals for oneself.
Are you guys going to walk down in your chuckles, or are you going to bring your speakers?
Chuckles! Oops, sorry about that. And it looks like somebody is unmuted. Oh, there we go. I found him. Thank you. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the theory of action for effective implementation that has been brought to us by Castle, again, using this wonderful resource that we have. So this is going to be kind of shifting our focus now into how we're going to create these classroom experiences. And even though we put classroom, what we're really talking about, again, because we're talking about SEL, is not just classroom, but also thinking about school, families, and communities. So to be most effective, it is essential that states, regions, districts, and schools infuse the principles of SEL across practices and policies, such as curriculum and instruction, extracurricular activities, discipline, student support services, professional learning, and ongoing assessment for continuous improvement. Castle's theory of action states that, if districts and schools address these key elements, it's going to be really helpful for implementation throughout the whole system. There are 4 key elements that guide this implementation and sustainability within the different activities throughout implementation of SEL. So building foundational support and plan by establishing a collective vision and plan for SEL, and ensuring aligned resources and ongoing commitment. So that's a really good start when you're getting into inclusionary practices in general, as well as promoting SEL strategies, is getting that really defined mission and vision with the language that you want to be able to utilize, so that everybody is on the same page and everybody understands, you know, these strategies and what everybody is really wanting to do, and developing that kind of foundation support. We're going to strengthen adult SEL competencies and capacity by cultivating a trusting community that enhances adults' professional, social, emotional, and cultural competencies and their capacity to promote SEL for students. So, you know, first we've got that foundational level. Now we're going to start building the house. And what we want to do with that is making sure that the adults who are going to be engaging with our students have that base understanding of what SEL is, how they're feeling about SEL, how they're feeling about the culture and the strategies that are being used in the school, in the classrooms, in the community, and really making sure that we've got that ability to kind of reflect on our own strategies and reflect on our own self before we're engaging in these social emotional learning with our students. Next, we're going to promote SEL for students by developing a coordinated approach across classrooms, schools, homes, and communities that ensures a consistent, culturally responsive, and developmentally appropriate opportunities for all students to enhance and apply social emotional competencies to daily tasks and challenges. So this is really important because we're talking about that generalization piece. If we're just doing SEL strategies in the classroom, but not in the school, not at home, not within the community, then we're going to have this disconnect and not be able to generalize these strategies along all of this continuum. So it's really important to have buy-in from everybody that's involved in these SEL strategies and being able to send things home to parents and provide support to parents as needed, as well as the community around us. And last, we're going to reflect on data for continuous improvement by establishing an ongoing process to collect and use implementation and outcome data to inform decisions and drive improvements. As a BCBA or Board Certified Behavior Analyst, of course, I love data. And what is really important is that we are able to, create these goals for our SEL strategies and then take data on how it's going in order to know whether we're making those goals, we're getting that mastery, or if we need to switch things around. Maybe our SEL strategies aren't really empowering our students or empowering the cultures that are within our students. And so we need to look at that data to identify whether we are making improvement and come back and change things if we're not. CASEL has some great resources on their website for achieving these elements, and those resources are going to be provided at the end. All right, any questions before we move on? Looks like we're doing really great. So we talked a lot about CASEL so far. Next, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the OSPI implementation guide for guiding principles in order to develop SEL in your schools and promote SEL. So the OSPI is the Washington Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, and they've created a really great framework for social emotional learning and implementation guide. The framework commits to these 4 guiding principles of equity. So each child receives what he or she needs to develop his or her full academic and social potential. Cultural responsiveness, drawing upon students' unique strengths and experiences while orienting learning in relation to individuals' cultural context. Universal design, which is being talked about as well while we're speaking now, and it provides a framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people by removing barriers to the curriculum. And lastly, trauma-informed practices. This recognizes that unique strengths and challenges of children and youth in the light of adversities that they face. Again, this is not a one-size-fits-all, so I'm not just going to give you a bunch of activities you can do in the classroom without first going over that understanding of developing SEL, in your school, in your classroom, and in your community. And these 4 things are going to be what guide you on your journey. So these aren't things that you just say, okay, yeah, check, 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 I've got them. Now let's go ahead and go forward. We're going to come back to these as we are continuing to evolve our SEL strategies in the classroom and in the community. And the OSPI implementation guide, which again will be in the resources, has some really great guiding questions to kind of keep us on track as we're going through this. So going back to equity, according to the National Equity Project, educational equity means that each child receives what he or she needs to develop his or her own full academic and social potential. This guide that we're talking about today focuses specifically on issues of education equality as it relates to race, gender, disability, sexual orientation, and economic status. So for instance, when we're talking about things like this, we're going to go ahead and look at their guiding questions. And one in particular that I took out that I thought was important is, to what extent is creating equitable and accessible learning environments and outcomes an implicit part of your SEL work? So this is a really great guiding question to reflect on as you're developing these SEL strategies and thinking of equity. When it comes to cultural responsiveness, we have to remember that culture is fluid and dynamic, with variations within cultural groups based on race, ethnicity, age, gender identity, sexual identity, immigration experience, community type, culturally responsive approaches to draw upon students' unique strengths and experiences, while orienting learning in relation to individuals' cultural context. So some guiding questions to think about here as we're developing our strategies and looking back on our strategies are, what supports do you have in place to allow adults in your school to critically examine their own sociocultural identities and bias? So what do we have to help ourselves reflect? Do we have coaches that kind of help guide those equity strategies within the classroom? Are we going to have professional development opportunities? Are we going to have some mental health days with some guiding reflections that you can send home with people? What's going to help guide your SEL practice when it comes to that? Another guiding question to think of, in what ways does the school provide support for adults in the school to get to know individual students' past experiences? And this is really important when we are taking into consideration that cultural responsiveness with SEL. If we don't know our students and where they've come from, it's hard to know what they're bringing into the classroom and what we can do to support them. Next, with Universal Design for Learning, this is a strategy that aims to change the design of the environment rather than change the learner. When environments are intentionally designed to reduce barriers, all learners can engage in rigorous and meaningful learning. So one guiding question here could be, how do you consider variability in students' social, emotional, and economic development when teaching and integrating social emotional skills? So obviously we all come from a variable state when we're coming in with the SEL strategies that we already have. And how do you consider those when you're developing your SEL program? Another thing to consider is what systems are in place to recognize the need and provide individualized social emotional interventions and goal setting when needed. So one thing we're going to provide in a few slides is some benchmarks that you can kind of use as that system in order to guide your learning or your development of your SEL practices. Lastly, going back to trauma-informed practices, trauma is broadly defined as any experience in which a person's internal resources are not adequate to cope with the external stressors. So this is something that can be provoked by a one-time experience, such as divorce or death of a family member, or ongoing experiences, such as abuse or neglect. Trauma can also be a collective experience, such as a historical trauma. Historical trauma is a cumulative, collective, emotional, and psychological injury over the lifespan and across generations, resulting from a history or group trauma experiences. One thing that we should also take into consideration as we're coming back is the trauma that we've all experienced through COVID. It's been, a tumultuous time for all of us, and we've all had very different experiences. So how are we taking those into consideration as we're developing these strategies? Some guiding questions include, to what extent do adults take a strengths-based approach in working with students? So we don't want to just look at what's going wrong or what the problem is in the classroom, but what are the strengths that our students have, and how can we help them, gain other skills using those strengths? To what extent does your school employ policies and practices, such as restorative justice, positive behavior interventions and supports, wraparound mental health services, trauma sensitivity training, practices that move away from punitive, disciplinary practices, but build a healthy culture and climate. So that's a really important one, again, kind of thinking about this lens of trauma as we're moving back into in-person setting. All right, so we talked about those guiding principles that are going to help us with SEL practices, but now let's talk about 3 essential things that we should have in place as we're developing these as well. So these are going to kind of be those pillars of strength. So we want to create conditions to support students' SEL. So successful implementation of SEL requires that systemic approach that addresses the climate and culture. We want students to develop social emotional competencies when they're given opportunities to learn in a safe environment in which they feel welcomed, respected, and connected. We want supportive and attuned relationships with adults who push students to meet their goals and the goals that are essential to student engagement and learning. Students are also learn to develop social emotional skills through the explicit instruction on these skills, accompanied by multiple opportunities to practice and generalize their skills. This is really important to think about, again, for that understanding of generalization. So we want to, maybe have a class around SEL if we like, or a subject around SEL like we have with math and science, but we also need to be embedding these strategies throughout. And that's where you're really going to be able to get that practice and that understanding of these SEL practices. When we're collaborating with families and communities and embedded learning opportunities for providers, we want to remember that it takes all of us, families, community partnerships, students, schools, to create a safe and supportive environment in which students can both access instruction on academic subjects, but also develop those social emotional skills that will influence the success in school, work, and life. Students will build social emotional skills in many different environments. We have to really remember that concept that families are the first teachers as our children grow. They're the ones that are, with them and guiding them through these practices. So if we don't involve families in these SEL strategies and goals, then we're really missing a lot of opportunity to get these strategies to be understood and be implemented. Lastly, we want to really be able to build adult capacity. So educators play an essential role in creating safe and supportive learning environments. So building a capacity for adults in the school setting is critical to shaping the culture of the school and setting the stage for positive outcomes for children. So we want to really make sure when we're doing this that we're considering that strong leadership that can begin to implement SEL. So if we are an individual teacher and we say, hey, these SEL strategies seem really great, I want to start doing this, but we don't have that buy-in from the leadership, we don't have the buy-in from the whole school, that's something that really needs to be worked on to help, again, with that generalization of these strategies across settings and across different people and getting that buy-in on the whole school-wide model. Do we have any questions about anything that we've talked about so far? All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on. We're going to stick with the OSPI concepts, but now we're going to get into standards. And so the purpose of these SEL standards, benchmarks, and indicators, or SBIs, is really to provide a framework to identify observable developmental milestones for students, recognizing that educators benefit from clear definitions of skills and dispositions articulating how learners develop. So these indicators were developed to provide developmental examples of the skills and dispositions. It's really here to establish kind of those general norms that we're looking for in these age ranges, but we have to understand that SEL strategies are going to be very different, between each different student. So these, again, are just some, standards to where we think developmentally each student could be, and this is how we're going to be able to develop some goals around these strategies. So this is one of the standards from our OSPI guidelines here. I'm going to leave this up so you all can start to look at it and explore it while I talk a little bit more about these standards. So in Washington State's grade band structure, Early elementary is defined as kindergarten through grade 3. Late elementary is grades 4 and 5. Middle school is grades 6 through 8. And high school is grade 9 and above. That's important to think about with our next activity. So I'll repeat it one more time. Early elementary is kindergarten through 3rd grade. Late elementary is 4th and 5th. Middle school is 6th through 8th. And high school and / adult is defined as grade 9 and above. So these indicators are to understand that, there are different age ranges to start to look at, but we have to understand that this is also a continuum, right? So we're going to kind of come back and forth through some of these sometimes, or just because you're in late elementary doesn't mean that you have necessarily those standards developed at that age. And so what are some goals that we can put in place to get to that point? The SBIs are intended to provide a starting point for districts. They will need to be adapted, obviously, like we've talked about, not that one-size-fits-all concept, based on the local content, rather than just adopted as directed or as written. And these are really great in terms of being able to identify some of those goals and work towards those goals. These are really to help educators develop an understanding of what to look for in terms of behaviors, just some examples. In terms of the specific level of competency. They provide examples of the observable behaviors across the developmental levels to guide educators' decisions that are critical, relevant, and appropriate to use within the students. And we have to remember, again, that this is a continuum, not one size fits all. So these are just some examples, not necessarily things that you need to fully accomplish in your setting. So next we are going to go ahead and come to our activity. So I'm going to place this standard in, or these standards in the chat to give you all access to the standards to be able to look at them when I put you into different groups. Today what we're going to do is look at this standard 2. This is for self-management. Individuals have the ability to regulate emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. I'm going to give you a case study and send you into groups where you can work together. What I want you to identify, I'm going to put in the chat also so you have access to, is what is the student's stage of development? Using these SBIs, is the student exhibiting skills according to their stage of development based on the observable behaviors that I talk about? And I want you, if needed, to write a realistic goal for the student. This doesn't have to be perfect or beautiful. This is just to give us a little bit of experience with these standards and how to utilize them. So here is my case study. I'm going to have you guys all listen. I didn't write this out for you, but if you can listen, that'd be great. So this is a 4th grade student who gets frustrated when they're not able to accomplish a task, such as opening a glue container or completing a worksheet. The student will engage in throwing, yelling behaviors and needs adult support to calm. So again, that's a 4th grade student who gets frustrated when they can't accomplish a task, and they engage in throwing, yelling, and need adult support to calm down. So we're going to identify, what stage of development, are they in that appropriate stage of development for their age, and what are some realistic goals? Perfect. Thank you, Rena Marie. I'm going to go ahead and put you in your breakout rooms, and we will do this for about 5 to 10 minutes. We'll see how things are going. All right. Let's see. Oops. Let's see. So is everybody in a group? It doesn't look like my breakout rooms worked. Okay, I tried to do this ahead of time, but obviously it did not work. So I'm going to just go ahead and assign people throughout and make sure that we have more than one people or person in each group. It'll take me just a moment. Thank you for your patience. Try to get about 4 people in each group. All right, is everybody in there? Nope, it looks like we still have a few people. Rena Marie, do you think you can help with this?
Thanks. I was just going to ask if you make me co-host, Cassie. I can.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, thanks. I just realized I was trying to, and I'm like, why isn't it working?
Oops. Oh, I just withdrew. Make co-host. There we go. Is that working?
So Cassie, it is not working. And we can also, people can, if you want to go ahead and click on the breakout room button on the bottom, if you can, and you can look and join a room that has about 3 people in it. Like room 9 still has some room in there. And I think in my attempt to put them in a breakout room, I think I sent them to the waiting room. So I'm trying to get them back.
Oh.
I don't see my waiting room. Maybe they came back in.
And so Michael and the Strata, if you both want to put your screens on and talk about it here, you're more than welcome to, or you're also welcome to work on this strategy yourselves too. Because I don't know why it won't let me put them in a waiting room or in one of the rooms.
I hope that person.
Welcome back, some of you. With a thumbs up or a thumbs down or in the middle, how did it go? Okay, nice. Is this helpful? Kind of going over these benchmarks as a group and discussing some of these strategies? Awesome. That is good to hear. We'll give a few minutes for everybody else to jump back in. We've got about 4 seconds. All right, everybody's coming back in. And I had a little bit of a show of hands, but if that was helpful, give me a thumbs up. Yeah, some nods, that's great. Digital thumbs up is awesome. I love the yellow hands, those are so fun. I do want to hear from you all. So if somebody would like to just jump up and say something either that went well or a barrier, or if you think that you'll use these benchmarks, I'm just going to let anybody shout out. I'm going to do that Zoom stare.
I think anyone could use the different standards there, but then they also have to incorporate what their district or what their school site, what they're using for the social emotional program.
Yeah.
And I would have liked a little bit more information just on the student, what they've seen so far.
Yeah, I know I tried to leave it really vague so we didn't have to go too much into goal development because there's so much that can be done. But thank you so much for your feedback. And I hope that these standards can be helpful, you know, and I know we do have some people outside of Washington State. So it's just another resource that can be really helpful as well. And it looks like, are there any standards or suggestions for preschool age students aligned with this? Kara, I can get back to you with some resources if you want to put your email in there, or go ahead and email it to me directly, then that would be great. And I'd love to connect with you on some of those things. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and we will jump back in here. Just organize my screen for a moment so I can see everybody and everything. All right, and if anybody else wants to share, feel free to jump out. Well, since we talked a little bit about the standards, let's talk a little bit more about some activities or some things that we can use to find some more information on how to embed some of these strategies into some curriculum or activities. This book is called Flexible and Focused, and it says, teaching executive function skills to individuals with autism and attention disorders, but it's really for anybody. Don't just think that you have to kind of pinpoint it on these specific individuals. I love this book because I think that teaching these executive functioning skills can be really difficult. And when I say executive functioning skills, we are talking about some of these strategies that we've already discussed, such as self-awareness here, thinking about inhibition and impulse control, self-management. Those are some things we've already talked about, as well as this down here, this emotional self-regulation is a really big part of it too. So this is a how-to manual that provides really practical strategies for teaching learners to be focused, organized, flexible, and able to effectively manage themselves. It's really great because it has a few ready-to-use lessons. And even if you don't use those lessons specifically, it's really easy to adapt and modify. In my practice, I've actually used a lot of these strategies for younger than 5, although 5 is the age that they gear it towards. But I've been able to really modify it to different age levels as well, which is really nice. It's really nice in order to help educators and providers tackle these common problems associated with executive functioning deficits. And again, it's ages 5 to adult. So these are really great strategies. It gives a nice overview of what the concept is, and then a really great step-by-step analysis of how to do it. So I'm going to just show you my book. It might be a little bit awkward, and I hope you can see it, but I like chapter 3 in particular. So this talks about, I think you can do this, self-awareness, inhibition, and self-management. And then I'm just going to give you a quick show here. It gives you like this worksheet of a strategy or a worksheet that you can use for your learners. I did this with a learner that I wasn't sure would be able to understand some of these questions. So we also used visuals when we talked about how to develop these. And it was amazing to see the student voice that came out. And I was able to really grasp so much more about this individual and be able to customize the programming that we did based on what they wanted to learn, and what they wanted to base their goals around. So it was very, very helpful to get that student voice. And then in here, it has the procedures and that step-by-step concept of how you're going to implement. So it's a really, really nice how-to manual and a good book, I think, resource for people to have. There is also in the resources a link to a podcast with the author that talks a little bit more about the book and about behavioral strategies and how it can be implemented. All right, so these are some additional learning resources. Again, in the beginning, I said, SEL strategies are not a one-size-fits-all. So we wanted to give you that really good understanding of building the framework and the foundation, understanding strategies to do that, thinking about this as a really great path. But these are some nice resources to give you some activities to start with and be able to modify to your own needs. This information is in the folder that Ariane gave us in the very beginning, so you all have access to this information. It is also on the copy of the PowerPoint that you will have in a PDF form. So it's in that resource section as well. So we are going to go ahead and move on, and I talk really quickly, so I am actually ahead of schedule, which is great. So we are going to take a 10-minute break to give people time to stretch and move and get coffee and whatever else you want. So we will come back at, let's see, It is 11:03. We will come back at 11:15, so just a little over 10 minutes. Go ahead and close your screen, do whatever you need to do to take a few minutes, and we will see you back here in a little bit. All right, it is 11:15 on the dot. So I'm going to go ahead and start us back up. I hope you all got a nice little break. You were able to get some water or do whatever you needed to do. The next topic we're going to discuss is about trauma, and that can be a really hard topic for people. So to get prepared for this, we're going to actually go ahead and do a form of an SEL strategy, and we're going to embed mindfulness into this strategy. So what we want to start thinking about is, what are we carrying around emotionally as we come back to in-person education? What kind of a lens are we using when we're observing behaviors in the classroom and engaging with students? Not only have there or will there have been social distancing and precautionary health considerations, but also think about the care that should be taken in terms of the social, emotional, and mental health of students and school staff. Teachers and administrators should operate on the assumption that everyone, students, families, and staff, will have experienced some degree of anxiety, stress, uncertainty, illness, grief, and loss. And so to prepare us to talk about a little bit more about some strategies and trauma in general, we're going to watch this video, and I did not cue this one up, so there might be a bit of an ad about how we can take deep breaths and kind of get ready and get centered for this. So let's go ahead and begin this activity here. Yeah, and there's a little bit of an ad.
Of meditation is that if you're meditating, your mind will be blank.
There we go.
Hello, my name is Sierra Nickerson. Today, I'll be guiding you in a simple stress management practice called box breathing. In this practice, we'll consciously lengthen the in-breath, the out-breath, and the pauses in between so that each portion has the same number of counts. This enables you to recover from distress and not get hijacked by strong emotions. Fun fact, because of its efficacy, box breathing has been adopted by the Navy SEALs, who also refer to it as tactical breathing. I'll be guiding this practice. My guidance is just an invitation. If at any point you want to pause, shift your pace, or stop the practice, you are welcome to do so. I invite you to choose a posture that is best for you. This practice can be done sitting, lying down, or standing up. Whichever posture you choose, adjust your position to be both comfortable and alert. You may close your eyes now or leave your eyes open with a soft downward gaze. We'll begin by breathing in, 2, 3, 4, pause, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out, 2, 3, 4. Pause, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Pause, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out, 2, 3, 4. Pause, 2, 3, 4. And coming to the end of this practice, allowing the breath to gently return to its natural rhythm. Taking the time to appreciate yourself, that you've taken the time to pause, to cultivate your capacity to be present with the breath, and to nurture yourself in this way. May you be well.
All right. So let's go ahead and jump right in. This is something that, again, was taken from OSPI in terms of their guidelines or pathway to getting back into in-person education. We need to remember, as we're going back into school, that disruptive or unusual behaviors may be attempts to cope with a feeling or being overwhelmed and should not be punished, but rather understood and addressed in a context with compassion and understanding. It's really important to remember that behaviors, as you're going to learn in the third of the series of SEL with Dr. Schwartz, that behavior is communication. It is a way to communicate. We need to figure out what's trying to be communicated. And using this lens of trauma, we're going to be able to better understand what needs to happen. So we can understand more of that range of reactions. Behaviors typically represent an unmet need if we're looking at it with this lens. And when we see students' misbehavior, we need to ask, what happened or what is happening to them versus what's wrong, and then ask them, what's strong with them. So trauma exposure may result in profound shift in worldview. A child may lose trust in the world as a safe place and no longer trust the people that will protect them. This shift can last long after the trauma has passed and impact relationships and situations that are unconnected to the initial trauma. So this is what we want to do, right? We want to use this lens of trauma to ask, what's happened to you, what's strong with you, and how can we help? Using a lens of trauma, we acknowledge what has happened and who or what is not there. Students and staff members might be struggling with these concepts because of somebody missing in their lives. We have to remember that, this could just be a transition in terms of who's missing or who's not there. These can be forms of trauma as well as, who is there and what is happening in the home and what is happening around them. So using this lens of trauma is going to help us to understand and develop these building blocks of enduring relationships, being aware of the student's life, having empathy, high expectations. This is a really important one, working with all learners, that we have high expectations of all of our learners and using this lens to approach it with those high expectations, because if we have low expectations, then our students aren't ever going to be able to continue to move on and move up. We want to have humility when we're engaging with our students, provide that unconditional care and forgiveness. Again, not being punitive about these behaviors that are going on, but understanding a little bit more about them. Consistency and predictability are really great strategies as we're coming back, and Rena Marie is going to talk about that a little bit tomorrow in our SEL program in terms of strategies you can do in the classroom to help with these. We want to be very intentional about what we are teaching and what is happening in the classroom, as well as the environment and materials that are around. We want to have that responsiveness to student needs. I really like talking about my own child with this one and thinking about the end goal of what's going on. So when we're at the dinner table, our goal of the dinner table is to form a family connection. We want to sit and eat. We want to talk about our day. That's our overarching goal, right? But we're responsive to our children's needs, and my son has a really hard time sitting still. And so we've had him stand at the dinner table because, again, he's meeting the needs of our goals, which is to come together as a family and get food in our bodies and understand the social constructs around eating. But he's standing, not sitting. Is that okay? Sure. Why not? We're responsive to his needs, but still accomplishing a goal together. Being patient and, having that restraint and understanding that we're coming in with some of our trauma of our own and being able to reflect on that in order to get some of that patience and that restraint. And another building block is really respecting and celebrating individuality. This is really important, especially since we're working with students of all abilities and focusing on inclusionary practices, making sure that we're respecting everybody that's coming into the classroom. So the trauma lens allows us to understand and recognize the role of past, and present trauma exposure and may have what it may have in the current behavior and functioning of a student. The trauma lens appreciates that trauma can cause a persuasive shift in the way you perceive and relate to every aspect of their world. So when we're thinking about this lens of trauma, we also want to make sure that we're getting supports for our students. So rapidly identifying students who are not successfully transitioning back to school, We want to address school readjustment concerns, transition planning, and that should really focus on preparing school staff to implement early warning systems and response strategies or procedures. So this would be quickly identifying students or family or staff who are having difficulties. They might be more withdrawn, more anxious, more depressed, and they might exhibit some other indicator that the time in this past year at home was really difficult for them, and that they could benefit from some really great community and mental health resources and support. This is a good time to think about the supports you have in your school and what you could provide for those wraparound supports. We want to provide personalized supports to aid those who with adjustment problems or exhibiting change that's interfering with their ability to function well in school. And we want to make sure, again, that we're referring students in need to additional services. So, you know, we can do everything that we can do here, but there are other people with some great expertise, you know, in the school, in the community. And so how are we going to reach out to get these additional supports for people who need them? And we want to initiate targeted social and mental health supports for those who experience major adjustment problems. This is a time to consider the mental health and social emotional support staff inside the school and sometimes outside of the school, and really connecting with the families to see what supports they, you know, could and might need. All right. Let's go ahead and move on. And so this last slide here is just another resource for everybody. It's a great trauma-informed SEL toolkit that can be downloaded and focuses on these 5 concepts in order to kind of come back into school, take that lens of trauma, and utilize it in the classroom and in the school and community. I also want to just make note that in the chat there, just a little bit further up, Raina Marie did put in a great resource for SEL strategies in the classroom for preschoolers. One of our IPP demo sites did a webinar that's about an hour and a half, I believe, long, and she provides some great resources. So that is in there, and I can add that to our resources page that you have access to as well. So these are some of the resources that we talked about. We've got CASEL and OSPI in here. We've got the benchmarks. A Slice of SEL is a podcast there at the bottom that I've recently gotten interested in, and I can't remember if it's out of Massachusetts, but they have also a framework like the SBIs for Washington for their own community. And so they go through and give you some really great feasible things that you can do in the classroom and in the school community based on each benchmark or based on each identified need for SEL strategies. So these are some more resources kind of continuing on the Flexible and Focus book that you'll all receive. There's a podcast that talks to the author and talks about the book and how to use it, as well as some more resources for books, COVID-19 considerations, and trauma-informed practices. So I will move on to here. Does anybody have any questions? I'm going to put the sign-in sheet in the, whoops, maybe. If not, Raina Marie can help me with that. We'll put the sign-in sheet back in the chat here. There we go. So there's that sign-in sheet. And then I'm also going to put a link for a survey. If everybody would take just a few minutes to fill out the survey, that would be really great to give us your perspective on how things went today and how we can improve our practices here and our strategies around professional development. I'm still open to taking questions, but I'm going to move on to this slide so everybody can get this information down if you'd like. This is my contact information. I just want to thank you all for being here. I know it was a lot of information, and I know that I speak very, very quickly, but there are lots of wonderful resources. No, you don't need to sign in again. It's just in case you missed it in the beginning. We want to give you lots of opportunities. So thank you all so much for being here. I'll stay on for a bit if we've got questions or comments or anybody wants to talk about some strategies that they're using in their program. This is a nice time to collaborate since we have so many wonderful people on here. And I'm going to stop sharing so that we can actually all see faces if everybody wants to jump on and share some strategies that they're using or have any questions. I'll do as my colleague likes to say and lean into the silence.
Our particular school is using the Stephen Covey highly effective students for our SEL, and we've been doing it for the last 3 to 5 years, and we've just really noticed that when all the people on the school were on the same page and being able to use the same language and stuff, it really made a huge amount of difference in just the feeling of the school, how the children felt about themselves, and with that particular program, the teacher becomes more of the facilitator and the children take over more of the actual teaching and leading the class. So it was very, very eye-opening, and we're really excited about continuing on the progress.
That is really fantastic to hear. What ages, what grades?
We are PK4 to 5th grade.
Wonderful. That is so exciting to hear. I love thinking about the concept too, as we are learning from our students all the time. I mean, even my own children, I learn something new every day, and it's just amazing if we're able to really use these SEL strategies for ourselves and be open and ready to kind of accept this information. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing.
It did take some time to understand it. We had a coach, so that was great that they were with us like really strongly for the first 3 years, and then slowly it's like, okay, how are we gonna take it to what we need for our students? So I really enjoyed that, and all of this was just re-justifying. Oh, we're doing that and that. That's my kind of thinking. So thank you for sharing yours as well.
Patricia, can you say the name of that program again?
It's called Stephen Covey, and we call it it's highly effective kids.
Oh.
And we're a lighthouse school where other people can come to your school and see how it's going on and see if that's something they want to take in. But yeah, Stephen Covey, highly effective adults, but then now they want for kids. Thank you.
Thank you.
I feel like we've all gotten used to the Zoom silence now. All right, I'm going to start calling on names to see if anybody wants to participate any of their either strategies in their school or their experiences with SEL. Because we did talk about storytelling this morning, this might be a really nice idea to come up with a story that you have of SEL that is either working well or you've had barriers to. So I'm going to just start with the top of my list. And Chelsea, would you like to share anything or any stories around SEL?
Sure. So just this last, I've been working as a behavior analyst for 10 plus years, and just kind of made the switch to an elementary school as a teacher. So to kind of never really take off the BCBA hat, but I'm a special ed teacher for preschool right now. And in one of, I've been supporting gen ed teachers with kiddos receiving SDI in those classes this past year. And we had one learner who just engaged in all the shenanigans. And yes, I can define that for you, but we'll just run with shenanigans for now. and just really was not able to get his wants and needs met, and consistently antecedents included just frustrating scenarios for him. You know, he was trying to do something, he couldn't do it. And so very kind of similar to the case study in that regard. And so what I loved in your presentation that you talked about was kind of talking like the trauma-informed practice and consistency and that piece of it. That really was something our team needed to really lean into and embrace, is providing a really consistent environment for him and being able to reinforce him consistently when he did start requesting support. And the whole team, I think, did a really, really good job of like, okay, we really wanted him to do the worksheet, but I'm hearing him use his words. And like, from a behavior analyst perspective, you know, we're thinking about like consistent reinforcement, but what that looks like to him is, I can trust you. I can trust this environment to get my wants and needs met. And it was really cool to see the team gather around him and really reinforce it. Yes, that's the dream, but looking at it from a trauma-informed practice perspective, it was just making this space and the environment trustworthy for him. So it's kind of a connection that I hadn't thought of before.
That's fantastic. How did your team kind of come together on that? Did you have any pushback, or did you need to get buy-in?
You know, I think everyone was in a state where they wanted to see some change in the behavior. And actually the gen ed teacher that I was co-teaching, which is in this call, and she did an awesome job of kind of flexing to this learner's needs. And we just kind of, you know, I think we started to see the change, and then that's reinforcing for the group of teachers. So yeah,
that's fantastic.
Worked out.
Thank you so much for sharing, Chelsea. And it looks like Kara has some questions on top 3 strategies to suggest to address adult SEL supports needed to in turn provide to the students. And where does a school or district start? I actually want to reach out to the community because I really like collaboration and think it's really important, especially since we all come from different communities. Does anybody have an answer to this one? Some strategies to address adult SEL support to provide to students? Let's see, that every student in the school are our students, no matter what class they're in. That's really awesome. I love that statement. That's very powerful. Does anybody have any strategies that they've used in their own school, or administrators who are here that has provided for their support for their staff? Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Nakla Koshi. I'm the counselor at the Seattle Jewish Community School, and I used to be a consultant at an early childhood school. So I would say that I think the thing that I find to be the most critical in shifting people's perspectives is reflective supervision, where a teacher has a chance to work with whoever is kind of overseeing their work in a capacity that they can, that is safe and predictable, and maybe hopefully trauma informed, in that if they're bringing their own trauma to the situation in an interaction with a student, that it's an opportunity for them to process how their response to a student might be impacted by their own experience with trauma. But reflective supervision allows people to really think about what you're bringing to the table and how it informs the way you see each individual student. Because, you know, we all have those situations where there's, you know, the students that you call on them the most because you know they're going to give you the most bright response, or you try to skew away from them because you think they're going to take the group onto a tangent. And so, you know, thinking about what you do in those situations, but in a more structured conversational setting rather than in the moment on the fly within the context of your relationship with a student.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that's important. I think it's also fun to, maybe intentionally call on those students that might take us on a tangent, because you never know where that tangent's going to go, right? And what you can learn, like we talked about learning from our own students, what you can learn from this opportunity. I remember when I was teaching in preschool and we were all in the group activities and we're sharing different experiences. I had a student that really perseverated on dinosaurs. And it was amazing how every conversation could come back to dinosaurs. It was just incredible how this happened. And just being able to have the students really understand more about dinosaurs embedded in all of these different structures, we turned that into a great learning opportunity to bring in, understanding and patience for the student. And then, the other students learned how to then engage with the student in the free choice play, like, oh, you see the student over here playing, well, I can take a dinosaur over, and I bet that would start some form of conversation, right? Learning other people's interests. And, it's just really fun to be able to do that. When you were talking, though, it reminded me about this book that I have over here in my pile of books called Coaching for Equity. And this is a really great resource. Elena Aguilar has a website that I can put in our resources as well that has some really great reflective worksheets to think about as a coach, but also just as a person trying to better understand how to teach for equity. And those are really great pieces to be able to reflect on our own capacity for the SEL work that we're doing and what we're bringing into the classroom and how we can maybe shift our goal or shift our gaze or our lens into something that is a little bit more culturally responsive and understanding what we're bringing into here. Thank you, Raina Marie. She put it in the chat there. So that's a really nice resource to be able to use too. And those tools online are free and so easy to use even if you haven't read the book, but the book is very insightful and being able to tell you a lot more about the details and the nuances. Does anybody else have anything they want to add or comment on? Margaret, it looks like you're really thinking there, contemplating. Do you want to share anything with us?
Sure. I teach first grade in a gen ed classroom, and I think this year what helped my class was, and our team was doing class meetings every day. And so that was just a good way to start the day and build connection and a sense of belonging for the kids. So I thought that was helpful this year. And then also our school counselor was really supportive and came into our Zoom meetings and helped our classes build their toolbox of strategies they can use if they're, and we use the zones of regulation. So that was really helpful in getting the kids to be able to name their emotions and recognize that in themselves and, all around in stories we read and their friends and things like that. So that was helpful. And I think that's something we'll continue next year with having some kids who were doing the hybrid learning model and some who were fully remote. And so I think we'll be coming in with a huge mix of just where every student's at. And so hoping to continue that and keep building on that.
Thank you. That's fantastic. It sounds like that gives you a lot of opportunity to learn more about the students too, and giving them a voice in the classroom. So that's really great. And Lori, I see that you put in here tapping out. Can you explain more about that? Oh, it looks like you're on mute.
What that means is if, say, I'm having a particular issue that the student and I can't get through, and then someone else in the classroom notices, and so then we swap out. So it eliminates the frustration and the situation gets solved. Then it also helps the student learn to be able to rely on all the teachers in the classrooms.
Yeah, I feel like that's a nice strategy too, almost to model for the students in terms of taking breaks. I know at home, I have a child who has, emotional regulation, difficulties, I'll say. And we practice constantly taking a break. He starts to get upset and I say, I see that you're getting upset and I think I'm going to get upset. I'm going to go take a break. I'm just going to walk away for a minute. And so that's a really nice way to model those behaviors too, of this is frustrating and this is, getting to a point where I don't know if I can help. I'm going to see if I can find help somewhere else or take a break. And so that's a really great way to model these, SEL strategies within the classroom too. It's fantastic. Well, I am happy to stay on here and chat with anybody who wants to continue the conversation. We have about 15 minutes left, but if you want to add 15 minutes to your lunch, that is okay too, or dive into those resources that we provided. Feel free, enjoy your lunch, and then I hope when you do come back, you come back to an awesome group where you can kind of get to start thinking about these strategies and what you're going to do to build your infrastructure around SEL strategies. So thank you all so much. And again, I'm here if you want to stay on and continue to chat, but if you want to jump off, that's great. I know some people really like long lunches, so.
What time are we supposed to come back?
We are coming back, that is a good question, at 1 o'clock. And okay. There should be a link in here somewhere that gets us to that. Raina Marie, do you have that link?
Yeah, I'm looking it up right now.
Okay.
I have a not so shareable one.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Oh, here. I think that this link gets you to all of the resources. So it should be, oopsies. This link, it should have that daily schedule in there as well. And that'll have the access to which group you go into based on kind of where you're located or the group that you're here with.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lori. And if anybody else has strategies or questions or anything, feel free to ask or jump in. Some people are probably realizing, oh, there's no talking anymore. I should jump off of this call. And do you need help with anything else, Lori?
No, I think I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, of course. I hope you have a really great lunch.
Thank you.
Cassie, you did a great job.
Thanks.
I'm sorry I was kind of jumped off the beginning. I had a issue come up on another program, but I was here for the second part. It was really good.